Hello, everybody. My name is Guthrie Ramsey. I am a musicologist and pianist who trained at the University of Michigan back in the late 80s and early 90s. And I've been asked by Dr. Louise Toppin to offer some remarks about uh, music study, classical music study, and my mentor and all of our elder, Willis Patterson, Dr. Dean Willis Patterson. I'm so happy to offer a few words, and I regret that I cannot be there with you over the weekend. I know it's going to be a big party, a lot of great information, because as we know, Dr. Louise Toppin, being a Southern girl, knows how to throw a very, very nice set. I'll begin by reading some words from Dean Patterson describing his symposium that he gave in 1985, similar to what you guys are doing now. And the proceedings were documented in Eileen Southern's The Black Perspective in Music in 1986. He writes that after 2 years of effort filled with very careful, arduous planning, fingernail biting while waiting for approval of the grants I had requested, and seeking to convince scholars, performers, teachers, some of them old friends, some I had barely or never met, that this could be an event worthy of the sacrifice of money, time, and energy necessary for their participation. The Black American Music Symposium became a reality. And then he goes on to talk about how it was a coming together of musicians and scholars in Ann Arbor, and it was unique in its combining of music making and discussion of music with the obvious spirit of commitment, enthusiasm, and goodwill on the part of everyone. He writes that there were 600 performers, panelists, composers, writers, and others joined in with 42 young artist scholar students, guests, and university and townspeople to share in this great adventure. Our audiences totaled more than 16,000 for the 6-day series of events. The good vibrations set into motion during that time are still being felt around the country. Now, as an historian, as I reread those words, it took me back to a lot of memories of Willis Patterson as a mentor. I actually came upon this article because I was writing the foreword of Raylinda Brown's, the great Raylinda Brown's magnificent manuscript on Florence Price, and I'm happy to announce this is it. This is her book. That it's I edited it, and with the help of Raylinda's sister Carleen Brown, another marvelous music scholar, the book will be published next year on the University of Illinois Press, so very happy. Now, I was looking for Raylinda's early career, and guess what I found? She was hanging around Willis Patterson. And I'll read a little bit about that moment. The year was 1979. Raylinda Brown didn't know it at the time, but fate was putting her on a course to tell another black woman's musician's life story. Brown was working on a graduate degree in African American Studies at Yale University. She was doing the yeoman's work of cataloging all the music in the James Weldon Johnson Memorial Collection of Negro Arts and Letters when she happened on an anomaly, a manuscript score written by a composer she'd never heard of and one that would change her life. The score was a symphony, Symphony Number 3 in C minor, and it was composed by a Florence Beatrice Price. Although she was intrigued by this woman and her music, Brown continued to work dutifully in the archive. The results of her efforts became her MA thesis, which she completed in 1980. It was published in 1982 and seen immediately as an important contribution to the field. She chose this kind of reference work perhaps as much for practical reasons as for her own scholarly curiosities. It was a finite collection, and thus, as a cataloging project, it had a clear endpoint. In other words, it perfectly suited an ambitious MA student with designs to move on to the PhD. The idea that she would have under her belt published research work before receiving her doctorate is telling. At the time that Brown was embarking on her topic, the new field of African American studies was gaining ground as a legitimate and dynamic discipline. Born of student protests in the 1960s, it was by the 1980s maturing into a bulwark of American arts and letters. Brown apparently understood that cataloging collections like the James Weldon Johnson Memorial Collection would certainly assist future researchers. More important, however, is that a thesis based on music would make a strong argument for the utility of music studies and, by extension, the expressive arts within African American studies. For all her administrative and organizational inclinations, those would bloom brilliantly later in her career. Brown would not have known that her serendipitous discovery of Price's Third Symphony would turn into a decades-long diligent pursuit to learn everything she could about Price and document it. A little further on, I write that she met or became more acquainted with Dr. Patterson when she, as a graduate student, attended the first Black Music Symposium that Willis Patterson gave. And I wrote about that moment. Ray Linda's notable mentors and interlocutors also included performers like Willis Patterson, an operatic singer and voice professor of music at the University of Michigan, the first African American to do so, by the way. In 1985, Patterson convened the Black American Music Symposium, which was at the time the most ambitious and significant gathering of musicians, scholars, educators, and composers to be assembled to acknowledge African American music's contributions to America. Raylinda Brown, who was listed as a PhD candidate in the program, served on a panel devoted to Black women musicians. No doubt she read from her dissertation in progress on Florence Price. Judging from her visibility at the symposium, certainly Willis Patterson was instrumental in giving a graduate student, that kind of stage. Judging from her visibility at the symposium and the trajectory of her career, she was by now recognized as an important emerging voice in the field. Indeed, Black music research and the larger discipline of African American studies, both of which she claimed were on the move, and Brown was certainly in the forefront of the mix. Now, that level of mentoring leads to this kind of contribution where young scholars such as myself believe that they could do it because Willis Patterson believed that we could do it. I'll end with a remembrance, two remembrances. First of all, when I arrived 4 years after the symposium, I arrived in Ann Arbor in 1989, and the atmosphere was still hot and radioactive because of the symposium, and it was just a great moment to be there. But Dean Patterson made it very clear that those fellowships that they were handing out, trying to get it to be diversified, he said, "This is funny money. Get your degree in 5 years and move on. Don't get too comfortable. get your work done and get out of here. Okay. And he looked at me with, coming to graduate school with 3 children. He said, you need to just hurry up and finish your degree and get out of here. And he was very instrumental in helping me out to find different, let's say resource sources, for my growing family. I really appreciate him for that. The last thing I'll leave you with is that a piece of advice that he gave me many, many years ago. He related the story of him practicing as either an undergraduate or a graduate student, I can't remember. But he said he would be in the practice room, running scales or learning some repertoire, and he would leave. And if there was anybody else still practicing when he left, he would turn around and go practice some more because he didn't want anybody to work harder than he did. And I thought about that advice recently because I was leaving the job one night and my little SUV was the last car in the parking lot late at night. And I thought, wow, I'm still doing what Dean Patterson told me to do, and that is to try to just work as hard or harder than anybody around me. And for lessons like that, and for the great lessons of his superb mentoring that people like Raylinda Brown benefited from, and so many of us, he just really did it for us. And I appreciate him for that. I will end with some remembrances. I don't know if you can see this. This is the great scholar Horace Boyer. There's Bill, there's Steve, there's Kira, myself. This is some of the things that happened at U of M, Ann Arbor. The great scholar Richard Long, the late Doris McGinty, the late great Eileen Southern. There's Dr. Patterson and myself. He introduced me to Eileen Southern when I was her research assistant on one of her projects that she and Willis Patterson were working on. She had me read the Chicago Defender from front to back, maybe 50 years of it. Had me fill out index cards for what I learned, and then I thought I was done, and she sent me my little index cards back and saying that I didn't do it right, so I had to go and do all that work again. The second time I went through the Chicago Defender was for Raylinda Brown, who had me read the entire run of the Chicago Defender looking for Florence Price references. So if any graduate students out there know you got to put your work in. Here's another picture. There's the great scholar and composer Ollie Wilson, Willis Patterson and Guthrie Ramsey grad school student pouring the coffee. And here's our girl, the late, great Raylinda Brown. So I have so many memories, and I'm going to cut it off right now. I'm at 13 minutes, and I know Louise didn't want me to go this long. Okay, bye. Have a great time, and I love you all. Bye.